One of those buildings with the coin laundry in the basement, my sister said. For the poor in general, to understand why everyone laughed and why the laughter died 30 seconds later, you have to understand what Cararissa believed about success and what I had allowed her to believe for 23 years. My name is Elsie Beckwith. I've spent the last 2 decades working for the Central Intelligence Agency. My official title is Deputy Director for Operations, which means I supervise clandestine activity across 3 continents. Unofficially, I'm the person they call when an embassy needs to be evacuated, when an asset has to disappear overnight, or when a senator needs a calm explanation for why we can't simply send in the troops. My family believes I'm a minor government employee who can't afford to buy a home. The lie began accidentally and eventually became operational necessity. When I joined the agency at 25, fresh out of Georgetown with a Master S in International Relations, I couldn't tell my family what I actually did. I work for the government was true enough to pass clearance rules and dull enough to shut down follow-up questions. My sister Cararissa, 3 years younger, had just gotten engaged to Bradley Witten, whose family owned a string of luxury car dealerships across the mid-Atlantic. She was planning a wedding that cost more than my annual salary, or what she believed was my annual salary. At family dinners, she'd squeeze my hand sympathetically and say things like, "Government jobs are so honorable even if the pay isn't great." I never corrected her. By the time I made GS-15 at 32, faster than anyone in my directorate's history, the story had hardened into family canon. Elsie, the struggling bureaucrat. Elsie, who couldn't afford the country club. Elsie, who drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a studio apartment in Arlington. The Honda was real, the apartment was real. What they didn't know was that the Honda had bullet-resistant glass and run-flat tires. And the studio apartment was one of 7 properties I owned across 3 countries, kept precisely because it was anonymous, forgettable, untraceable, and 2 minutes from CIA headquarters. I found the whole thing darkly funny. "You should let me introduce you to Bradley's accountant," Cararissa said at Mom's 60th birthday party. "He could help you budget. Maybe you could finally save for a down payment." "Maybe," I replied, sipping champagne that cost more than her accountant earned in a week. I just returned from Beirut, where I coordinated the extraction of a diplomat's family ahead of a bombing. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, and completely uninterested in explaining that I could buy her house outright if I felt like it, but I didn't want to. I wanted to watch her perform this carefully maintained fantasy where she was the successful sister and I was the charity case. It told me things about her, things that were useful. It kept me observant. And after years of managing intelligence operations where every word mattered and every pause could be fatal, there was something soothing about a space where nothing I said carried any weight at all. "The problem," my mother said gently once, "is that Elsie doesn't prioritize financial stability. She's too idealistic." Idealistic, right. 2 weeks earlier, I'd authorized a drone strike that dismantled a terrorist cell preparing coordinated attacks on 3 U.S. embassies. I reviewed the intelligence, confirmed legal authorization, and gave the order. 8 people died, hundreds didn't, but yes, idealistic, the pattern repeated itself endlessly. I showed up to Thanksgiving in jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt. Cararissa arrived in Chanel. "I wish you'd let me take you shopping," she whispered. "I know money's tight, but you could at least try to look polished." I'd flown in from Berlin that morning on a military transport, carrying a diplomatic pouch with intelligence assessments for the National Security Advisor. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. "I'll try harder," I said. When my nephew asked what I did for work, Cararissa answered before I could. "Aunt Elsie works in an office building. She does paperwork for the government." "Like a secretary?" he asked. "Something like that," Cararissa said, smiling. I smiled back. 3 days earlier, I'd briefed the president's chief of staff on a Russian influence operation. But sure, something like a secretary. The worst part wasn't the condescension. It was that Cararissa genuinely believed she was being generous. She thought inviting me to events she assumed I couldn't afford and offering to cover things I didn't need was kindness. She didn't realize it was surveillance. Every assumption she made, every word she spoke told me exactly who she was, and who she was I was starting to see was jealous. Not of my job, she had no idea what my job was, but of something else. my independence maybe, the fact that I didn't need her approval or her help. That I'd built a life completely separate from the family's fixation on status and social climbing. She needed me to be failing so she could feel successful. I let her have it. The invitation arrived in March, cream-colored envelope, embossed lettering. You're invited to celebrate Cararissa and Bradley's new home. New home was an understatement. They de-purchased an 8,000-square-foot colonial in McLean, Virginia, 6 bedrooms, a pool, 3-car garage, gated neighborhood. Neighbors included lobbyists, defense contractors, and inherited money. It's our dream house, Cararissa gushed over the phone. You have to come to the housewarming. I know it's far from your place, but maybe you could take the metro. I'll figure it out, I said. The party was scheduled for Saturday, April 15th at 6 p.m. On Tuesday, April 11th, my deputy director called. We've got a situation in Caracas. Ambassador needs an immediate security assessment. State wants someone senior on the ground. When, Thursday, you be back Saturday afternoon, I glanced at my calendar. Cararissa's party was that evening. Book it, I said. Caracas was deteriorating faster than forecasts predicted. The embassy was exposed. I spent 2 days reviewing security protocols, coordinating with the regional security officer, and drafting recommendations that would likely require congressional approval. By Saturday morning, I was airborne again, headed for Andrews Air Force Base. We landed at 3 p.m. My security detail drove me to my real apartment, the one my family didn't know about, where I showered, changed into civilian clothes, and checked my phone. 17 missed messages from Cararissa. Where are you? The party started an hour ago. Everyone's asking about you. Are you even coming? I texted back on my way. Sorry, work thing. My phone rang instantly. A work thing, Cararissa snapped. What work thing could possibly be more important than this? I'm just running late. I'll be there by 7. Elsie, this is my housewarming for my dream house. Could you please just once prioritize family? I thought about the 18-hour days in Caracas, the ambassador's children sleeping in a safe room, the threat assessments. I'll be there by 7, I repeated. She hung up. I arrived at 7:15 p.m. in my Honda, parking between a Tesla and a Range Rover. The house glowed like a magazine spread, glass, columns, manicured hedges. Inside, guests in cocktail attire laughed over wine. I rang the bell. Cararissa opened the door, smile stretched tight. You made it, I made it. Everyone's in the living room. We're doing tour. Her eyes flicked over me. You look tired, long week, I'm sure. She lowered her voice. Bradley's parents are here. And his boss, please don't mention money problems. It's embarrassing. I nodded. I'll keep it vague. The house was exactly what I expected. Marble countertops, designer furniture. A wine fridge worth more than most cars. Cararissa floated through it all, pointing out Italian tile, heated floors, custom cabinetry. I stood near a window with a glass of wine, half listening. Elsie, my mother, appeared. Come meet Bradley's parents properly. Roger and Patricia Witten, silver-haired, country club refined, people who measured value in square footage and memberships. Elsie works for the government, my mother said, the way someone might say Elsie volunteers at the animal shelter. How nice, Patricia said. What department? I'm with an agency in Virginia, I replied. Oh, her interest vanished. Well, that's stable. The word hovered like a consolation ribbon. Cararissa swept back with another couple. These are the Harrisons, 3 doors down, the corner house with the circular driveway. Madison Harrison smiled politely. Do you live nearby, Elsie? Arlington. Oh, Arlington's lovely. Which neighborhood? Here it was. The moment I could mention the Clarendon condo, the Georgetown brownstone, the operational properties overseas. Instead, I said, I rent a studio near the metro. The pause was almost imperceptible. That's practical. Cararissa laughed too loudly. Elsie's always been practical. She's very good at making do with less. My mother chimed in. She's been in the same apartment for years. I keep telling her she should buy something, build equity, but she trailed off with a helpless shrug. Real estate's expensive, I said mildly. It is, Madison agreed sympathetically. But if you ever want recommendations for financial advisors, my brother works with first-time home buyers. He could probably help you qualify for something. That's kind of you. Carissa was beaming. This was her party, her house, her moment to be the successful sister surrounded by successful people. And here I was playing my role perfectly. The charity case, the cautionary tale, the one who'd never quite figured it out. I sipped my wine and watched her glow. Around 8:30, most guests had completed the house tour and migrated back to the living room. Carissa stood by the fireplace, Bradley at her side, holding court. Someone asked about square footage. Someone else asked about the mortgage rate they'd locked in. A man I didn't recognize, one of Bradley's colleagues, asked where everyone else lived. The Harrisons mentioned their mansion. Another couple mentioned their place in PTOAC. Patricia Whitten mentioned their weekend home in Rahabit Beach. Then someone, I think it was Madison Harrison, turned to me. "Where did you say you lived, Elsie?" The room didn't exactly go quiet, but there was a shift, a subtle attention. I could have deflected, changed the subject, made a joke. Instead, I said, "Arlington, I rent a studio." My mother's voice, quiet but audible. "Still renting a studio, I think." Carissa seizing the moment, her voice bright with performative sympathy. "One of those buildings with the coin laundry in the basement for the poor in general." Laughter, uncomfortable but real. The kind of laughter that happens when someone says something mean that's also funny, and everyone's relieved it wasn't said about them. Bradley's boss chuckled. Patricia Whitten covered her smile with her wine glass. Madison Harrison's eyes widened, half shocked, half amused. My mother looked at her shoes. Carissa was still smiling. That bright, brittle smile that meant she'd landed the joke she wanted. She'd positioned herself exactly where she needed to be. Successful, generous, tolerant of her struggling sister. I smiled too, because in that moment I knew something she didn't. I knew that parked 2 blocks away, a motorcade was waiting. I knew that my security detail had been tracking my location since I left the base, and I knew that in about 30 seconds. They were going to realize I'd been stationary at a residential address for over an hour, which triggered protocol. The laughter was still echoing when I heard it, the low rumble of heavy vehicles. Through the front windows, headlights appeared, multiple vehicles moving in formation. A black SUV pulled up directly in front of the house, then another, then a third. The laughter died. Everyone turned toward the window. Doors opened. Men in dark suits emerged. Professional, precise, unmistakable security detail. The kind you see on the news accompanying diplomats and high officials. Carissa's face went white. "What's the doorbell?" Rang. No one moved. It rang again. Bradley, looking confused and slightly panicked, opened the door. 2 men stood there, earpieces, suits. The lead agent scanned the room, his eyes landing on me. "Madam," he said, his voice calm and formal, "the motorcade is ready." The silence was absolute. Every eye in the room turned to me. I set down my wine glass with careful precision. "Thank you, Agent Morrison. I'll just be a moment." "Of course, ma'am. We'll wait outside." They withdrew. The door closed. The silence stretched. Carissa's voice came out, strangled. "Elsie." I turned to her. "I'm sorry, I have to go. There's a situation that requires my attention." "A situation?" She looked like she'd been slapped. "What situation? What? Who are those people?" "Security detail." I said simply, "Security detail for what?" I could have explained, could have laid it all out. The title, the clearance level, the 20 years of service. Could have told her about Caracas, about Beirut, about the 15 countries where I'd coordinated operations she'd never hear about on the news. Instead, I smiled. The same smile I'd been giving her for 2 decades for work. My mother found her voice. "I'll see what's going on. I really do have to go, Mom. Carissa, thank you for having me." The house is beautiful. I walked toward the door. The crowd parted like water. Bradley's boss, the man who chuckled at the laundry joke, was staring at me with something like recognition dawning. "Wait, Beckwith, Elsie Beckwith, you're your DDO, Deputy Director for Operations." I paused at the door, hand on the knob. "Have a good evening, everyone." I walked out. The motorcade was arranged in standard formation. Lead vehicle, my SUV, trail vehicle. Agent Morrison opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Before I climbed in, I glanced back at the house. Every face was pressed against the windows, frozen, staring. Carissa stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame like she might fall without it. Her face was chalk white, her mouth open. My mother stood behind her, both hands over her mouth. Bradley looked like he was trying to solve an equation he didn't have the numbers for. And Patricia Whitten, the woman who called my career stable, had dropped her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white marble entryway like blood. I climbed into the SUV. Agent Morrison closed the door. "Langley, ma'am," he asked. "Langley," I confirmed. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. They were still standing there, frozen in the windows of the mansion. The house that was supposed to prove Carissa's success, the party that was supposed to celebrate her arrival. And I thought about the coin laundry joke, about 23 years of condescension and pity, about the studio apartment they thought defined my failure. That studio apartment was worth $1.2 million. I owned it outright. I also owned a 3-bedroom condo in Clarendon, a brownstone in Georgetown, and a villa in Lisbon that I had purchased for operational reasons, but kept because I liked the view. My personal net worth, including investments in property, was somewhere north of $8 million. But more than that, more than the money, more than the property, I had something Carissa would never understand. I had purpose, I had power, I had a job that mattered. And for 23 years, I'd let her think I had nothing because it was easier than explaining, funnier than correcting, and more useful than she could possibly imagine. The motorcade turned onto the highway heading toward Langley. My phone buzzed, a message from my deputy director. Crisis in Caracas escalating. Need your assessment for NSC briefing tomorrow, 80. I typed back on my way, I'll have it ready. Another buzz, this time. Carissa, what just happened? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed I had to go to work. Thanks again for the party. The house is beautiful. Really? I didn't add, and by the way, I could buy it 3 times over. I didn't need to. The motorcade said it all. I never heard directly from Carissa about that night, but my mother called 3 days later, her voice small and careful. Elsie, honey, I need to ask you something, okay? What exactly do you do for work? I was in my office at Langley reviewing intelligence reports from 6 different embassies. I work for the CIA. Mom, I'm the deputy director for operations. A long silence. Then for how long? 23 years. 23 years, she repeated, and you never told us. I told you I worked for the government in Virginia. I was never dishonest, but you let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think. I said gently what was easier for everyone. Carissa she's very upset. I'm sure she is. She said you humiliated her in front of everyone. The motorcade, the security, everyone's talking about it. I thought about the coin laundry joke, about the laughter, about 23 years of being treated like I was too incompetent to manage my own life. I didn't humiliate her, I said. I just left a party when I was needed at work with a motorcade. That's standard protocol for my position. Another silence. Are you angry with us? The question surprised me. No, Carissa thinks you did it on purpose to embarrass her. Carissa thinks everything is about her. I said this was about me doing my job. She's having a hard time with this. I imagine she is. My mother's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Were we really that awful to you? I could have said yes. Could have listed every condescending comment, every pitying look, every assumption that I was failing because my success didn't look like theirs. Instead, I said, you saw what you expected to see. We all do that. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, Elsie. I had no idea. I know. Can you forgive us? I looked out my office window at the Langley compound, the buildings where I'd spent 2 decades serving my country. The place where my work actually mattered. There's nothing to forgive, I said. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. That was my choice. Why didn't you? I thought about that, about operational security, about the convenience of being underestimated, about how easy it had been to just let them believe their own story. Because I said finally, it was easier than explaining, and because honestly I didn't need you to know, I knew that was enough. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of my office. I thought about Carissa's face in the doorway, about the dropped wine glass, about the way Bradley's boss had whispered my title, like he was solving a puzzle he should have figured out years ago. And I realized something. I'd spent 23 years letting them think I was poor, struggling, barely making it. Not because I was hiding, not because I was ashamed, but because their opinion of me had never mattered enough to correct. The people who needed to know what I did, the president, the joint chiefs, the intelligence community, they knew. Everyone else was just noise. I turned back to my computer and opened the Caracas assessment file. There was work to do, and that in the end was